The text message came at 3:17 a.m. from Mrs. Patterson's phone. "Please help me, I'm not really dead." But Mrs. Patterson had died 3 days ago. I was there when her heart monitor flatlined. When I went to the morgue to check her body, I discovered something that would expose the most horrifying medical fraud in our hospital's history. My name is Camilla Washington, and I've been a night shift nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center for 12 years. In that time, I've seen patients recover from impossible odds and witnessed peaceful deaths that brought families closure. I thought I understood the clear line between life and death, between hope and acceptance. I was wrong. What I discovered that Friday night shattered every belief I had about medical ethics and human decency, and taught me that sometimes the most horrifying crimes are committed by people who take an oath to do no harm. This is the story of how a text message from beyond the grave exposed a conspiracy so twisted that it challenged everything I thought I knew about the sanctity of life and the trust patients place in their medical caregivers. Eleanor Patterson was 73 years old when she was admitted to our cardiac unit with what appeared to be a massive heart attack. She'd collapsed at home while gardening, and her husband Robert had called 911 immediately when he found her unconscious in their backyard. Eleanor's condition was critical but not hopeless when she arrived at St. Mary's. She'd suffered significant heart damage, but she was conscious, alert, and responding well to initial treatment. Her cardiologist, Dr. Marcus Webb, was optimistic about her chances for recovery with proper care. "She's a fighter," Dr. Webb told Eleanor's family during the first day. "The next 48 hours will be crucial, but I'm cautiously optimistic about her prognosis." Eleanor's family gathered around her bedside, her husband Robert, her daughter Susan, and her son Michael, who'd flown in from California. They were a close family, and Eleanor drew strength from their presence and support. As Eleanor's primary nurse, I monitored her condition closely during those critical first days. She was on a ventilator and various cardiac medications, but her vital signs remained stable, and there were encouraging signs that her heart function was improving. "How am I doing, Camilla?" Eleanor whispered when she was briefly conscious between medication doses. "You're fighting hard, Mrs. Patterson. Your family is here, and you're getting the best possible care." "I'm not ready to go yet. Robert needs me, and I want to meet my new grandchild when Susan has her baby." Eleanor's determination to live was evident in every interaction. She squeezed my hand when I explained procedures, nodded when I asked about her pain levels, and consistently showed the kind of fighting spirit that often makes the difference in critical care situations. That's why what happened on Monday night was so shocking. Monday evening started routinely. Eleanor's condition had been stable throughout the day, and her family had gone home for the night after spending most of the day at her bedside. Her vital signs were encouraging, and Dr. Webb had mentioned the possibility of removing the ventilator within the next few days. At 11:30 p.m., I was checking Eleanor's monitors when I noticed an irregularity in her heart rhythm. It wasn't immediately dangerous, but it was different from the pattern she'd maintained for the previous 3 days. "Mrs. Patterson, can you hear me?" I asked, but she didn't respond. Her sedation levels were higher than usual, which seemed strange since Dr. Webb had planned to reduce her medications to prepare for ventilator removal. At 11:47 p.m., Eleanor's heart monitor began showing more pronounced irregularities. I called Dr. Webb immediately and prepared emergency medications in case her condition deteriorated rapidly. Dr. Webb arrived within minutes, but instead of implementing aggressive treatment, he seemed strangely calm about Eleanor's declining condition. "Her heart is failing," he announced after a brief examination. "We need to prepare the family for the worst." "Doctor, her condition was stable just an hour ago. Shouldn't we try more aggressive interventions?" "Nurse Washington, cardiac patients can deteriorate rapidly. Mrs. Patterson's heart has sustained too much damage to recover." But something felt wrong about Dr. Webb's assessment. Eleanor's monitors showed heart rhythm problems, but not the kind of catastrophic failure that would warrant giving up aggressive treatment. At 12:23 a.m., Eleanor's heart monitor flatlined. Dr. Webb called the time of death, and I watched as he turned off the machines that had been keeping Eleanor alive. The whole sequence felt rushed and premature, but Dr. Webb was the attending physician, and his medical judgment superseded my nursing observations. Eleanor's family was devastated when they arrived an hour later. Robert Patterson could barely stand as doctor. Webb explained that his wife's heart had simply given out despite their best efforts. "I don't understand," Susan said through her tears. "Mum seemed to be getting better. She was talking about meeting her grandchild." "Cardiac recovery can be unpredictable," Dr. Webb replied with practiced sympathy. "Sometimes patients seem to improve before their hearts simply can't continue functioning." Eleanor's body was prepared for the morgue following standard procedures, and her family began making funeral arrangements for Thursday. I completed my paperwork and went home feeling unsettled about Eleanor's sudden death, but trusting that Dr. Webb's medical expertise was beyond my understanding. 3 days later, I was working another night shift when my phone buzzed with a text message at 3:17 a.m. The number was one I recognized immediately. It was Eleanor Patterson's cell phone. The message read, "Please help me, I'm not really dead." I stared at my phone screen, certain I was seeing things. Eleanor Patterson had died Monday night. I had been there when her heart stopped. I had helped prepare her body for the morgue. My first thought was that someone was playing a cruel prank, perhaps using Eleanor's phone to torment her family or the hospital staff. But who would have access to her phone 3 days after her death? I texted back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "This is Eleanor Patterson. They said I died, but I'm trapped. Can't move, but I can think. Please help." My hands were shaking as I read the message. Either someone was perpetrating an incredibly cruel hoax, or something impossible was happening. "Where are you?" I typed. "Basement, room B12, phone in my pocket. Please come quickly." Room B12 was in the hospital's basement, near the morgue and pathology departments. It was an area I rarely visited, but I knew it was used for storage and administrative functions. Against every logical thought in my mind, I decided to investigate. The basement of St. Mary's Medical Centre was a maze of storage rooms, maintenance areas, and medical facilities that most nursing staff never accessed. Room B12 was located in a section near the morgue that was typically locked after hours. As I made my way through the dimly lit corridors, my phone buzzed with another message. "Hurry, getting weaker, can't move but aware of everything." The messages were coming from Eleanor's phone number, and they contained details that only Eleanor would know. But Eleanor Patterson was dead. I had watched her die. When I reached room B12, I found the door unlocked. Inside was a medical examination room with a single gurney covered by a white sheet. The room smelled of disinfectant and something else, something organic and unpleasant. My phone vibrated again. "I'm here, under the sheet. Please check." With trembling hands, I pulled back the sheet and nearly collapsed from shock. Eleanor Patterson was lying on the gurney, her eyes open and moving, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She was alive, but she couldn't speak or move. "Mrs. Patterson, can you hear me?" I whispered. Her eyes moved toward me, and I could see recognition and desperate plea for help in her expression. she was alive. Eleanor Patterson, who had been pronounced dead 3 days ago, was conscious and breathing on a gurney in the hospital basement. I immediately called for emergency medical assistance while trying to understand how Eleanor could be alive when I had witnessed her death 3 days earlier. As paramedics arrived to transport Eleanor back to the ICU, I began investigating how she had ended up in the basement. What I discovered was more horrifying than I could have imagined. Eleanor's medical record showed that she had been pronounced dead at 12:23 a.m. on Monday night, but the death certificate had been delayed for administrative reasons. Her body had been moved to the basement for temporary storage pending family funeral arrangements. But Eleanor wasn't dead. She was in a state of profound paralysis that mimicked death, caused by a drug that had been administered without proper authorization. I reviewed Eleanor's medication records and found a discrepancy that made my blood run cold. At 11:15 p.m. on Monday night, just minutes before her condition began deteriorating, someone had administered succinylcholine, a powerful paralytic drug that stops all voluntary muscle movement while leaving the patient completely conscious. Succinylcholine was not prescribed for Eleanor's condition and had no legitimate medical purpose in her treatment. Someone had deliberately paralyzed her, making her appear dead while she remained fully aware but unable to move or speak. The drug had been administered by Dr. Webb, who had then pronounced her dead when her paralyzed state mimicked cardiac arrest. As Eleanor was being treated in the ICU for the effects of prolonged paralysis and dehydration, I began investigating how Dr. Webb had managed to fake her death and why he would commit such a horrifying crime. The answer lay in Eleanor's medical insurance and the hospital's financial incentives for certain types of patient outcomes. Eleanor Patterson had excellent insurance coverage that paid premium rates for extended cardiac care. However, if she recovered fully from her heart attack, the insurance payments would stop and the hospital would lose a significant revenue source. But if Eleanor died during treatment, the insurance company would pay a substantial settlement for complications during cardiac care, and Dr. Webb would receive bonus payments for managing difficult cases, even though the patient didn't survive. Dr. Webb had been systematically murdering patients with good insurance coverage, using paralytic drugs to fake their deaths, and then collecting insurance payouts for treatment complications. Eleanor's case was different because her cell phone had remained in her pocket when she was moved to the basement. The phone's GPS tracking and cellular connection had allowed her to send messages even while paralyzed. When Eleanor recovered enough to speak, her account of the past 3 days was harrowing beyond imagination. "I could hear and see everything," she told police investigators. "I heard Dr. Webb tell you I was dead. I felt them moving my body to the basement. I've been conscious for 3 days, unable to move or speak, thinking I was going to die alone in that room." Eleanor described hearing Dr. Webb and others discussing how to dispose of complications and maintain revenue streams through appropriate patient outcomes. She had managed to send text messages by using voice-to-text features on her phone, activated by whispered words that the paralytic drug couldn't completely suppress. I kept trying to whisper "help" and "alive" into my phone, hoping someone would receive the messages. Police investigation revealed that Dr. Webb had been operating this scheme for over 2 years, murdering patients with good insurance coverage and collecting bonus payments for managing difficult cases with fatal outcomes. The hospital administration had been unaware of Dr. Webb's crimes, but they had inadvertently enabled them by creating financial incentives that rewarded doctors for certain patient outcomes without adequate oversight. The investigation into Dr. Webb's crimes revealed a pattern of patient murders that shocked the medical community and law enforcement. Over 2 years, Dr. Webb had murdered 14 patients using various methods designed to mimic natural death or treatment complications. His victims were all patients with excellent insurance coverage, whose extended treatment would generate significant revenue for the hospital. Dr. Webb's method was sophisticated and difficult to detect. He would administer paralytic drugs or other substances that would cause apparent death, while the patient remained conscious but unable to respond. The patients would be pronounced dead, moved to temporary storage, and eventually buried alive unless they were discovered in time. Eleanor Patterson was the only victim who had been able to communicate after being declared dead, and her survival exposed the entire conspiracy. The investigation also revealed that Dr. Webb had been falsifying medical records, forging death certificates, and manipulating insurance claims to cover up his murders and maximize financial gain. Dr. Webb was arrested and charged with 14 counts of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including Eleanor's testimony, falsified medical records, and financial documents showing his profit from patient deaths. During his trial, Dr. Webb showed no remorse for his crimes. He claimed that he was optimizing hospital resources and managing patient care for maximum efficiency. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict him on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Eleanor Patterson made a remarkable recovery from her ordeal. The 3 days of paralysis had caused some muscle weakness and psychological trauma, but she regained full function and returned home to her family. "I never gave up hope," Eleanor told reporters during Dr. Webb's trial. "Even when I couldn't move or speak, I knew that someone would realize something was wrong. Nurse Washington saved my life by believing that the impossible was possible." The Dr. Webb case led to sweeping reforms in medical oversight and patient safety protocols. Hospitals nationwide implemented new safeguards to prevent similar crimes, including mandatory second opinions for death pronouncements and improved monitoring of patient medications. St. Mary's Medical Center faced multiple lawsuits from families of Dr. Webb's victims, and the hospital administration implemented comprehensive reforms to prevent future abuse of patients. Most importantly, the case led to federal legislation requiring GPS tracking devices for all patient medical equipment and mandatory recording of all medical procedures to ensure transparency and accountability. Eleanor Patterson became an advocate for patient rights and medical transparency. She established a foundation that provides resources for families who suspect medical malpractice and supports reforms in hospital oversight. "My survival was a miracle," Eleanor said during a speaking engagement at a medical ethics conference. "But it shouldn't take a miracle to prevent doctors from murdering their patients for money." 3 years later, I still work night shifts at St. Mary's Medical Center, but everything about the job feels different. The trust that patients place in us feels more precious and more fragile, knowing how easily it can be violated by someone who sees patients as revenue sources rather than human beings. Eleanor Patterson visits the hospital occasionally, and she always stops by to thank me for believing her impossible text messages and investigating when logic suggested I shouldn't. "You saved my life by trusting what didn't make sense," she told me during her most recent visit. Most people would have dismissed those messages as a prank or a mistake. The Dr. Webb case taught me that sometimes the most important nursing skill isn't medical knowledge or technical competence. Sometimes it's the willingness to investigate when something doesn't feel right, even when the evidence suggests impossibility. Eleanor's text messages from beyond the grave weren't supernatural. They were the desperate communications of a woman who refused to die quietly while her murderer collected profit from her supposed death. But they did represent something miraculous. The power of technology, determination, and one nurse's willingness to believe that the impossible might be possible when a patient's life hangs in the balance. Sometimes the most important calls for help come from the most unexpected sources. And sometimes the difference between life and death isn't medical intervention. It's someone caring enough to answer a text message that shouldn't exist. Eleanor Patterson was declared dead on Monday night and buried alive for 3 days. But she survived because she never stopped fighting, and because one nurse believed that death isn't always final when someone is still trying to communicate. The line between life and death isn't always as clear as medical professionals assume, and sometimes the most important medical discoveries come not from examining patients, but from listening to them, even when they're supposed to be silent forever.